Welcome to John Carter Stories. I sat in my car outside the bank that Tuesday morning with the engine still running and my hands resting flat on the steering wheel. Through the windshield, I could see the ordinary world moving around me. People coming in and out with their coffees and their phones, going about their Tuesday like nothing was about to change. But everything was about to change. At least for me. My hands were steady. That surprised me more than anything. I had already made the appointment. I had already made my decision. What I had not done was tell a single living soul. The heater hummed quietly beneath the dashboard, warming my feet, and I checked my phone one last time before getting out. No missed calls. No messages. Good. I turned off the engine, picked up my bag, took one long, slow breath, and pushed through those glass doors. My name is Harold. I am 60 years old, a retired firefighter from Pinewood Falls, and I have lived in this town my entire life. I raised my 10 daughters in a house on Ridgeline Drive, a good house, a solid house, the kind of house where you could hear the floorboards creak in the hallway and smell whatever was cooking from any room in the building. Their mother, Evelyn, and I built our life inside those walls. And when Evelyn got sick, and when she eventually left this world, I thought those walls would be enough to hold the rest of us together. I was wrong. Please subscribe and like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. My daughters are all grown now. The oldest, Diane, is 40. The youngest, Sophie, is 25. In between are 8 more women I raised, fed, worried about, cried over, and loved with everything I had. Their names, from oldest to youngest, are Diane, Carol, Fiona, Lynn, Sandra, Janet, Paula, Tracy, Nina, and Sophie. 10 daughters. 10 lives I poured myself into for 4 decades. And on Christmas Eve of last year, not one of them showed up for dinner. Oh, I know how that sounds. Let me take you back to the beginning so you understand how we got there. Evelyn passed away 3 years ago, just before Christmas. She had fought hard and long, and with a grace that made everyone around her feel like they were the ones being comforted in her final weeks. She called me to her bedside late one evening after the girls had gone to sleep in various corners of the house, all 10 of them home for what we both quietly understood would be the last time. She took my hand. Her fingers were thin, cold, but her grip was firm and her eyes were absolutely clear. "Harold," she said, "I need you to promise me something." I would have promised her anything in that moment, and she knew it. "If they forget you after I am gone," she said, "do not let them take you for granted." She looked at me and her voice was steady as stone. "You will know what to do." I did not fully understand what she meant. Not then. I thought I did. I told myself I did. But understanding something in your head and feeling it in your chest are 2 entirely different things. I would not feel in my chest until I was sitting alone at a table set for 10 with cold food and a silent phone and the snow falling heavy outside. Let me tell you about the house first. We bought it 32 years ago when Evelyn was pregnant with Diane, and we needed more space than our little apartment could offer. 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a big kitchen, a yard with an oak tree that all 10 of them climbed at various points in their childhood. We paid it off over the years, slowly and steadily, the way you do when you are a firefighter and your wife works part-time at the local library. Nothing was ever handed to us. Everything we built ourselves. After Evelyn passed, I stayed in the house. Of course I did. It was full of her. Her handwriting was on the recipe cards in the kitchen drawer. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand. Her coat was still hanging by the front door because I could not bring myself to move it. The house was enormous and quiet in mine, and I rattled around inside it like a marble in a tin can. The girls called in the beginning. They checked in, they visited, they sat at the kitchen table and cried with me and reminded me that Evelyn would want me to keep going. But as the months passed, the calls became shorter. The visits became less frequent, and the conversations, when they happened at all, began to follow a familiar and eventually predictable shape. They needed something, not always money. Sometimes advice, sometimes babysitting, sometimes help with a form or a phone call or a decision. But over time, more and more often, it was money. A car repair here, a dental bill there, an emergency that always seemed to arrive at the most inconvenient time. And because I loved them, because I was their father, because that is what I had always done. I helped. I did not keep a running tally. I did not ask for dates of repayment. I just helped because helping was what I knew how to do. But something was shifting underneath me, slow and quiet, the way the ground shifts before it gives way. If this story is already landing somewhere deep, please hit that like button right now. It helps more people find this video. And trust me, we have only just begun. Stay right here with me. It was October when I first sat down and really looked at the numbers. I had been going through some paperwork, the kind of tedious sorting you do when you're trying to get your affairs in order, and I pulled out 12 months of bank statements and laid them across the kitchen table. I sat there for a long time staring at what I saw. Over the course of 1 year, I had sent or given money to all 10 of my daughters, some of it in large lump sums, some of it in smaller transfers that I had barely noticed at the time. Added together, the total was just over $10,000 in a single year. $10,000 moving outward from me to them, and in the other direction, almost nothing. Not money. I was not asking for money back, but phone calls that were longer than 5 minutes. Sunday visits that were not tied to a request. A birthday card that arrived on time. Basic evidence that I existed to them as something other than a resource. I stood up from that kitchen table and walked to the window and looked out at the street, and I heard Evelyn's voice in my head as clearly as if she were standing beside me. You will know what to do. That was October. By December, I had done what Evelyn had asked me to do in that hospital room. I set a table for 10. I cooked a full Christmas dinner, turkey and mashed potatoes and cranberry sauce and rolls, and an apple pie that cooled on the counter and filled the whole house with the smell of cinnamon. I set out the good glasses, the crystal ones we only use for occasions that mattered. I lit the Christmas lights I had strung up 3 days before, and then I sat down and I waited. The clock ticked, the snow fell, the street outside went dark and quiet, and one by one, the texts began to arrive. Diane had a work emergency. Carol was with her husband's family. Fiona was snowed in at a friend's place. Sandra's children were sick. Lynn could not make the drive. Janet was covering a shift. Paula and Tracy had already made other plans. Nina had a prior commitment. Sophie, my youngest, the one who still called me every Sunday to ask how to cook a roast or fix a leaking tap, sent me 2 words. Rain check. Weeping quietly right there in my kitchen, I set the phone down on the counter and looked at the table. 10 plates, 10 empty chairs, the turkey going cold in the center, the cranberry sauce catching the light. Everything perfect and everything pointless. And then my phone buzzed one more time. Diane, my oldest, the one who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms and make me promise nothing bad would ever happen. The message was in capitals, the way people write when they are shouting through a screen. We have no obligation to keep you company just because you are lonely. Dad, you need to understand we have our own lives. Stop making us feel guilty for living them. I read it once. I read it twice. I set the phone face down on the table. And somewhere in the quiet of that house, I heard Evelyn's voice one final time. You will know what to do. And Harold finally did. I had spent 3 years waiting for my daughters to remember me. That night, sitting alone at a table set for 10, I stopped waiting. What I did in the days that followed would send shockwaves through all 10 of their lives. Stay right here, because this is only the beginning. I did not sleep that Christmas Eve. Not really. I sat up past midnight in the armchair by the window with the Christmas lights blinking on and off across the empty dining table, and a glass of Evelyn's favorite wine in my hand. I had opened the last bottle we had bought together, the one we had been saving. I poured a glass and raised it toward her photograph on the mantel. Merry Christmas, my love, I said to the empty room. You were right. You were right about all of it. Weeping now, quietly, into the silence of a house that had once been so full of noise and life and running feet that the walls themselves had seemed to breathe, I reached under the bed before I sat back down. The box Evelyn had told me about in her final weeks was exactly where she said it would be. Brown cardboard, the size of a shoebox, with a label on top in her handwriting. Important. Open only when ready. I was ready. Inside were papers organized with precision that had always been distinctly Evelyn. property deed, bank statements, insurance documents, investment portfolio records. I went through them one by one, adding the numbers in my head. The house, valued at $485,000. The savings account. The life insurance payout that had arrived 6 weeks after the funeral and sat untouched because spending it felt like acknowledging something I was not ready to acknowledge. The retirement fund from 30 years with the Pinewood Falls Fire Department. All told, just over $700,000. At the very bottom of the box, beneath a rubber band that had started to dry and crack, was an envelope sealed with wax. Evelyn had pressed her initial into it. E for Evelyn. I broke the seal. Inside was a document dense with legal language, and at the top in bold print, the Evelyn Rose Calloway Irrevocable Trust. I read it slowly. Then I read it again. Evelyn had gone to a lawyer a month before she died and had created a trust funded with $600,000 from her life insurance, her personal savings, and the proceeds from some business shares she had quietly sold. The document was precise and clear and absolutely unambiguous. All 10 daughters were named as beneficiaries. The condition for distribution was simple. All 10 had to be physically present at the family home by 6 in the evening on December 24th, 2024, for a shared Christmas dinner. Any daughter who failed to appear would forfeit her share. If any single one of them did not show, the entire trust would pass to the Pinewood Falls Community Foundation. The trust was irrevocable. It had been witnessed, notarized, and accompanied by a psychological evaluation confirming Evelyn was of sound mind. It could not be challenged. It could not be changed. Ha ha ha, Evelyn. Even at the end, even in her very last weeks, she was 3 steps ahead of everyone. I sat at the desk in the small office off the hallway and opened my laptop, battery at 12%. I plugged it in and composed a short email to the lawyer whose name was on the trust documents. Raymond Clark of Clark Legal Associates. I explained that the test date had passed and that none of the 10 daughters had been present. I attached photographs of the empty table and the timestamps of the messages I had received. I asked him to proceed to the next steps as outlined in the trust. I hit send, closed the laptop, sat back. Then I pulled open the bottom drawer of the desk and took out a stack of cream writing paper, the expensive kind Evelyn kept for letters that mattered, and I began to write. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something. Have you ever sat alone in the silence of a house that should have been full of people who love you and felt that particular kind of pain that does not have a name? Drop a comment below. Tell me where you are watching from. And stay with me because what happens next changed everything. I wrote 10 letters, 1 for each daughter. They were not angry letters. They were honest ones, which I have come to understand is a much harder thing to write. Diane's letter began with a memory. The day she graduated. She had called me from the steps of the building before she had even called her mother. "Dad, I did it," she had said. "I still believe in you," I wrote. "But I cannot keep being the person you call only when you need something. The account is frozen. The card linked to my name is suspended. If you want my time, you will need to start giving me yours." Carol's letter was gentler. Fiona's shorter. Sophie's the hardest to write, because Sophie was the one I had still hoped might surprise me, and she had not. Each letter ended the same way. "I love you. That has not changed. But something else has." I folded each one into an envelope and wrote a name on the front. Then I carried them to the dining room and set one in front of each of the 10 plates that still sat waiting on the table, still arranged in a perfect circle, still exactly as I had set them the evening before. I stood back and looked at the scene. 10 plates, 10 empty chairs, 10 envelopes, the Christmas lights still blinking. Then I went upstairs, set my alarm for 7, and slept better than I had in months. By noon the following day, Raymond Clark had filed the necessary paperwork. Every account my daughters had access to through my name was frozen, effective immediately. Every card linked to my accounts was suspended. The allowances I've been quietly and consistently sending to all 10 of them each month stopped mid-transfer. My phone, sitting on the kitchen counter with the ringer off, lit up at 12:04 in the afternoon. It did not stop lighting up until after dark. I counted the missed calls that evening when I finally picked it up, 76. Weeping and laughing at the same time, because Evelyn would have had something to say about that number. She always said everything in our family happened in multiples of 10. Diane had called 19 times. Carol 12. Various husbands and sons-in-law had attempted to reach me 8 more times between them. The texts numbered in the hundreds. Some were demands. Some were threats. One from Diane's husband was a legal warning. And buried somewhere in the middle of all of them was a single message from Carol that said simply, "Dad, are you okay?" That was the only one that asked. 76 missed calls, hundreds of texts, and not one of them asking how I was until it was too late. But the real storm had not even arrived yet, because that evening, headlights swept across my living room wall, and cars began to park in my driveway. "Stay right here." They came at 5:30. I was upstairs when I heard the first knock. Except knock is not the right word. It was a pounding, hard and fast and insistent. The kind that says the person on the other side of the door has already decided this conversation is going to go their way. I walked to the bedroom window and looked down. 3 cars in the driveway, then more pulling up along the curb. Diane's black Mercedes, Carol's silver Honda, Fiona's blue Toyota, and then more. Sandra, Lynn, Janet, Paula, Tracy, Nina, Sophie. All 10 of them, plus 4 husbands. 12 people in total standing in my driveway in the December cold looking up at the house. I stood at the window for a long moment watching them. Diane's husband, Robert, was the one pounding. "George, open the door. We need to talk now." His voice carried even through the glass. I went downstairs, slowly. My knees ached the way they always did in cold weather. 30 years of running into burning buildings will do that to your joints. I reached the front door, put my hand on the knob, and counted to 10. Then I opened it and stepped back. They came in like a flood. Diane first, straight past me without looking, coat still buttoned, boots dripping snow onto the hardwood. Robert behind her, tall and tight-jawed. Then the others one after another until the hallway was packed with bodies, and the smell of cold air and expensive perfume and something else, something that felt like the edge of a panic none of them wanted to name out loud. I raised one arm and pointed into the dining room without saying a word. They followed the gesture and went still. 10 plates arranged in a circle, 10 envelopes, one in front of each, their names written in black ink. Fiona saw hers first. She stepped forward slowly like she was approaching something she was not sure was safe. "What are these?" she said quietly. "Read them," I said, and so they did. The room filled with the soft sound of paper tearing, and then went almost completely silent. Real silence this time, not the uncomfortable kind. The kind that happens when people are actually reading something that lands. I watched their faces. Diane read fast, her jaw working. By the second paragraph, her face had gone red. Carol read carefully, line by line, her expression folding inward. Fiona held the letter with both hands, her eyes moving slowly. Sophie got halfway through and stopped. Her chin trembled. Tears ran down her face, and she did not wipe them away. She just stood there holding the letter, weeping quietly, and for one moment she looked exactly like the little girl who used to fall asleep in the car on the way home from her grandmother's house and have to be carried inside. Ah, my heart. I cannot explain what it is to love someone so completely and be so deeply disappointed by them at the same time. It is its own particular kind of grief. Diane crumpled her letter, not dramatically, just closed her fist around it until it was a ball of paper. "This is ridiculous. You are blaming us for having lives." I looked at her. "I am not blaming you for having lives. I am drawing a line about how you treat mine." Robert stepped forward, the way large men sometimes do when they want to fill space. He pointed a finger at me. "You froze those accounts without warning. That is financial abuse." I kept my voice very quiet. "Those accounts have my name on them, not yours. Margaret is your daughter. She has a right. She has no right to money I earned. None of them do." Carol tried next, measured and careful the way she always was. "Dad, surely there's a way to talk about this calmly. There has to be a middle ground." "There is," I said. "It starts with honesty." Fiona spoke up then, sharp. "Honesty. You want honesty? Fine. We did not come because we did not want to, because being here feels like an obligation. Because every single time we visit, you look at us like we have already failed you before we have even taken off our coats. So yes, we chose something else. And I am not sorry. The room went very still. I nodded. I let her words settle. Then I said, all right, and I am glad you said that, because now I can say this. You all made a choice, and now I am making mine. Are you still with me? Because this next part is the one that changes everything. Before we go further, hit that like button and drop a comment. Tell me what you think so far. I am reading every single one. Do not go anywhere. Robert stepped closer. His voice rose. And what choice is that exactly? I kept my eyes on Diane. The account stay frozen. The house is going on the market. And the trust your mother created will be distributed according to her wishes. Not mine. Hers. Diane went pale. What trust? Before I could answer, a voice came from the far end of the room, small and unsteady. I knew. Every head turned toward Carol. She was standing near the window, arms wrapped around herself, looking like someone who had been holding a secret for so long the weight of it had changed the shape of her posture. Diane stared at her. Knew what? Carol swallowed. Mom set up a trust fund before she died. A real one. Legal. She told me just before she passed. She said if we all showed up on Christmas Eve 2024, we would each receive our share. But if we did not, she stopped, swallowed again. It all goes to charity. The silence that followed was not just quiet. It was dense. You could have pressed your hand against it and felt it push back. Robert's voice came out flat. How much? I looked at him steadily. That is not the question you should be asking. His jaw tightened. How much? Enough that you would never have needed to ask me for anything ever again. Diane turned on Carol. You knew. This whole time you knew, and you said nothing. Carol's voice broke. I did not think Mom was serious. I thought it was something she said in the hospital because she was frightened and she wanted us to be closer. I did not know she had actually. She stopped, pressed her fingers to her lips. Actually what? Sandra said from across the room. Build a legal test. I said, quietly. To find out which of you want a father and which of you wanted a trust fund. The room erupted. Overlapping voices. Questions without answers. Someone say my name. Someone else repeating the word trust like it was a word in a foreign language they were trying to understand. I waited. Then I said, sit down. No one moved. Sit down. One by one, slowly, they found chairs. Some at the table. Some on the couch. Sophie lowered herself to the floor and sat with her back against the wall, and her knees pulled up to her chest, still weeping silently. I stood at the head of the table and looked at each of them. I have one question, I said, and I want an honest answer. They waited. Do you want a father? Or do you want a trust fund? No one spoke. Because if it is the money, I said, just tell me. I will sign the papers tonight, and we will all go our separate ways, and none of us will have to do this anymore. Sophie's voice broke through the silence, weeping, barely audible. I want my dad. And that is when I had to look away for a moment, out the window, at the snow still falling, steady and patient, because I was 60 years old and I had spent 3 years waiting to hear that, and hearing it now from a youngest, the one who had sent me 2 words on Christmas Eve, it cracked something open in me that I had been carefully keeping sealed. Sophie said she wanted her father, but Diane stood up and walked out. And the next morning, I received a call that changed the course of everything that remained. Stay right here. Diane left that night without looking back. Robert followed. So did Sandra and Lynn and Janet and Tracy. 6 of them. Out the door and into the cold, one after another, without a goodbye, without a backward glance. Their car started in the driveway, and their headlights swung across the living room wall one last time, and then they were gone. For remained Carol, Fiona, Nina, and Sophie. They sat in the wreckage of that evening, and did not speak for a long time. Sophie was still on the floor. Fiona had her face in her hands. Nina was staring at the table. Carol was looking at me. I walked to the kitchen and came back with plates of reheated food. The dinner I had cooked the night before, the dinner that had gone cold while I waited alone. I had kept in containers in the refrigerator because some part of me had not been ready to throw it away. I served them. I went around the table with the platters, putting food on each plate, just as I would have done if they had arrived when they were supposed to. When everyone had food, I sat down. 3 rules, I said. No phones on the table. No talk about money. And no one leaves until everyone has finished. No one argued. We ate in near silence. The kind of silence that is not empty, but full of things people are not yet ready to say out loud. Sophie ate very little. Fiona kept stopping with her fork halfway to her mouth, and then setting it back down. Carol ate steadily and mechanically. Nina was the only one who cleared her plate. Halfway through the meal, I set down my fork and looked at them. When your mother died, I said, I thought I had lost everything, but I still had you. And I told myself that would be enough. He stopped. But you were not really here. Not the way I needed. You called when you needed something. You visited when it was convenient. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, I stopped mattering to you as a person and started existing only as a resource. Carol flinched. Dad, I am not saying it to hurt you. I am saying it because it is true and because I spent 3 years pretending it was not, and I am done pretending. Fiona put her fork down. What do you want from us? I want you to show up, I said. Not for money. Not because there is something in it for you. Just to show up because I am your father, and I am still here, and one day I will not be. Weeping. Nina, quietly, not making a sound, tears running down her face and dropping onto the tablecloth. Sophie reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her fingers were small and cold. I am sorry, Dad. I am so sorry. I turned my hand over and held hers for a moment. Then I let go and picked up my fork. We finished the meal. They helped me clear the table. And then one by one they came to me at the door before they left. Fiona squeezed my arm without saying anything. Nina said she would call in the morning. Carol stood in the doorway for a long moment with her coat in her hands and said, I did not know it had gotten this bad. I should have known. Sophie was last. She put her arms around me and held on tight. I stood there with my hands at my sides for a breath, and then I hugged her back. She was shaking. Or maybe that was me. She let go and stepped back. Her eyes were swollen. Will you answer if I call? Yes, I said. I will always answer. She nodded, and then she was gone. The house was quiet again, but it was a different quiet than the night before. Not the silence of absence. More like the silence after a storm has passed, and you are taking stock of what remains. 4 stayed. 6 walked out. And in the weeks that followed, what those 6 did with their silence said more than anything they had ever said out loud. Stay right here. The most important part of this story is coming. 3 weeks later, I sat in a conference room at Clark Legal Associates across a long table from all 10 of my daughters for husbands and Raymond Clark himself. The trust meeting, the one Evelyn had planned for, and I had merely been the instrument of. Raymond read the terms clearly and without drama. The Evelyn Rose Calloway Irrevocable Trust, established November 2022, funded with $600,000. Condition for distribution. All 10 daughters physically present at the family home by 6 on December 24th, 2024. Condition not met. Full amount transferred to the Pinewood Falls Community Foundation. Robert shot to his feet before Raymond had finished the last sentence. $600,000. Gone because of one dinner. That is insane. Not one dinner. Raymond said, looking at him with the patience of a man who had dealt with 1,000 Roberts. You lost $600,000 because not one of your 10 daughters showed up. Diane turned to me, her face white. You knew about this the whole time. Your mother set the terms. I followed them. You could have warned us. We would have come. I looked at her. Would you? She opened her mouth. Closed it. Raymond cleared his throat. There is more. He turned a page. Section 3.2, Alternate Distribution Authority. Every person in that room went very still. In the event that the primary condition is not met, Raymond read, George Harold Calloway retains a right, for a period of 10 years from the date of Evelyn Rose Calloway's death, to petition the court for redistribution of trust funds to one or more daughters, but only if he believes they have demonstrated genuine and sustained change in their relationship with him, and only if the court concurs. The silence lasted about 4 full seconds. Then Diane said, So you hold the cards? Your mother held the cards, I said. I am just carrying them. Robert leaned forward. So for the next several years you get to decide who is worthy and who is not. Is that what you wanted? I looked at him steadily. She wanted her daughters to remember they have a father. She built a system to remind them of that. What they do with the reminder is up to them. Diane stood up and walked out. Carol followed. Then Sandra. Then Lynn. Then Janet. Then Tracy. 6 of them. Gone again. Raymond slid an envelope across the table toward me. Your wife asked me to give you this after the meeting. She said you would know when to open it. I picked it up. Cream paper. Evelyn's handwriting. For Harold. To be open when the truth has been told. I held it in my lap while Raymond finished the paperwork. Then I drove home, made a pot of tea, sat in the armchair by the window, and opened it. For pages in Evelyn's small, precise handwriting. I read every word twice. She apologized for the burden she had placed on me. She told me what she had set aside in a separate account for me to use only for myself. She mentioned a young boy named Thomas, the son of the nurse who would care for her in her final months. She had left a small fund for his education. She asked if I felt moved to add to it. And at the very end she wrote, "You have given enough, my love. Now choose what you want. Not what they need. Not what they expect. What you want." I folded the letter and held it in both hands. Weeping now, properly, shoulders shaking, tea going cold, the afternoon light shifting across the floor. 60 years old, a retired firefighter, alone in his armchair, crying over a letter from his dead wife who had loved him so much she had planned all of this from a hospital bed so that he would not spend the rest of his years being forgotten. Oh, Evelyn. Oh, my love. I rented a small cottage on the coast. 1 bedroom, big windows, a porch that faced the water, and floorboard that creaked under every step like the place itself was saying hello. The town was called Harbor Crest, population just over 3,000. The kind of place where the coffee shop knows your name by the 3rd visit, and nobody asks you too many questions. I had been there 2 weeks when there was a knock at the door one morning. A man about my age, broad-shouldered, white-haired, wearing a faded hoodie that said Pinewood Falls Fire Department retired across the chest. He held out his hand. "My name is Walter," he said. "Evelyn called me 2 years ago. She told me you might end up here." Ha ha ha. Even from the other side of everything, she was still 3 steps ahead. Walter was the director of the Harbor Crest First Responders Community Center, a low building 2 streets from the water, where retired firefighters and paramedics and police officers gathered on Tuesday and Thursday mornings to drink coffee and not have to explain themselves to anyone. He led me there and introduced me around. Good people. People who had spent their working lives running toward danger and were now figuring out what to do with the quiet. I started going on Tuesdays, then Thursdays too. Walter and I walked along the boardwalk most mornings. He did not say much. Neither did I. It suited us both. The house sold on January 3rd. I was standing at the cottage window with my first coffee of the morning when I saw the confirmation email arrive. $485,000. All cash. The buyer was a nonprofit organization called the Safe Harbor Foundation, which provided transitional housing for retired first responders. They wanted to name it the Evelyn Calloway Home. I sat down very carefully in the nearest chair and did not trust myself to stand again for several minutes. She would have loved that. I said out loud to nobody. She absolutely would have loved that. Weeping again. The good kind. The kind that does not leave you empty but actually, strangely, fills something up. I sent a group message to all 10 daughters telling them the house had sold, what had been sold to, what would be named, and that they had until January 30th to collect anything they had left behind. The responses came within the hour. Diane said she could not believe I had sold it to a charity. Carol said they should have been consulted. The other 4 who had walked out of the trust meeting said variations of the same. But Nina replied with 2 words. Mom would have loved that. And Sophie sent a voice message that I listened to 3 times. It was just her crying softly and then saying, "Dad, that is the most beautiful thing. Tell me in the comments. And if you have dealt with something similar, share your story. You are not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life." 6 months passed. And in those 6 months, 4 of my daughters made their way to Harbor Crest. Not all at once. Not with phone calls announcing their arrival. They just came. Carol came first. She sat across from me at the little cafe on the harbor and did not mention the money once. She talked about her job, her youngest daughter, a book she had been reading. After 2 hours, she asked if she could come back next month. I said yes. Sophie arrived 2 weeks later with a cardboard box full of photographs in the house. Old ones, family holidays, birthday parties, Christmas mornings. She sat on my front step and cried before she even knocked on the door. When I let her in, she said, "I lied to you. I was not at work on Christmas Eve. I was out with friends, and I did not want to cancel on them." She looked at the floor. "I chose them over you. I am sorry." I let the silence sit for a moment. "I know," I said. Then I put the kettle on. Fiona came in March. She showed up on a Saturday morning and asked if I wanted to walk. We went along the beach boardwalk for 20 minutes without a single word. Then she stopped, turned toward the water, and said quietly, "I was afraid you would never forgive me. I have not decided yet." I told her. She nodded. "That is fair, but I am willing to try." Nina came in April with her 5-year-old son, Marcus. I had not seen him since he was 2. She stood at my door holding his hand and said, "I want him to know his grandfather, the real one." Marcus looked up at me with enormous, serious eyes. Then he grinned. "Are you Grandpa Harold?" "Yeah," I said. "I am Grandpa Harold." He shook my hand like it was a formal agreement, and then asked if I had any biscuits. "Ha ha, that boy, that beautiful little boy." The other 6, Diane, Sandra, Lynn, Janet, Paula, Tracy, never called, never wrote, never showed up at my door asking how I was. Their silence was the loudest thing they ever said to me, and after a while I stopped listening for it. The house on Ridgeline Drive officially became the Evelyn Calloway home on February 15th. I drove up for the opening. Walter came with me. A small ceremony, a ribbon, a bronze plaque by the front door. I stood in front of it and read the words they had engraved. The Evelyn Calloway home. In memory of a woman who believed in second chances. I ran my thumb over the letters. She did believe that, I said quietly. She believed it more than anyone I ever knew. Walter put a hand on my shoulder. "Good woman." "The best," I said. We drove back to Harbor Crest that evening, and I sat on the porch of the cottage and watched the sun go down over the water and thought about everything it had taken to get to this particular moment, this particular evening, this particular quiet. I had spent 40 years being the person everyone came to, the father, the provider, the one who answered the phone and opened the account and wrote the check. I had confused that role with love for so long that I had lost sight of the difference. Love is presence. Love is time. Love is showing up when it is inconvenient and calling just to ask how someone is doing and stay on the phone past the point where the conversation runs out of news and just sitting together in quiet. Love is not a transaction. And when it becomes one, it is not love anymore. It is just a habit that benefits one party more than the other. Evelyn knew that. She knew it before I did, and she spent her last weeks making sure I would eventually know it too. This past Christmas Eve, I set 5 plates on the table. Last year there had been 10, and the table had been full of silence and cold food and empty chairs. This year there were 5, and the room was full of actual people. Carol and Sophie and Fiona and Nina and Marcus, who sat between his mother and me and talked for almost an entire meal about a snowman he had built and what he believed snowmen think about at night. Ha ha! Oh, that child! He made every single person at that table laugh so hard that Nina had to wipe her eyes, and I am not entirely sure whether she was laughing or crying or both. Halfway through dinner, Carol set her fork down. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Are you going to petition the court about the trust?" The table went quiet, for my daughters looking at me across the plates and the candles and the leftover rolls. "No," I said. Carol blinked. "No, the money stays with the foundation. Your mother built that trust to fund programs for people who need it, and that is exactly what it is going to do. I have set aside $50,000 from the house sale for Thomas Wren's education. He is the son of a nurse who cared for your mother in her final months. And $100,000 went to the Evelyn Calloway home. The rest I am keeping for myself, for the life I am going to live." Sophie's voice was barely a whisper. "We are not asking for anything, Dad. I know you are not. That is exactly why I am telling you. We finished the meal, moved to the porch. The evening was cool, and the sky was that particular shade of December purple that only happens near the water. Marcus ran down to the sand and chased seagulls with the absolute conviction that this time he was going to catch one. Sophie came and stood beside me at the railing. She leaned her head briefly against my shoulder. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not giving up on us." "I did not give up," I said. "I just stopped pretending everything was fine when it was not." She nodded. "Same thing. Maybe." I looked out at the water, at the last light on the horizon, at Marcus running back up the slope toward us, arms out, breathless, grinning, shouting, "Grandpa Harold, come and see what I found." I went and I knelt down in the sand next to my grandson, and I looked at whatever small miraculous thing he had discovered at the edge of the water, and for that moment, that one clear, simple moment, nothing else in the world existed or needed to. 6 daughters never came back. For did. I lost the ones who were only there for what I could give them. I found the ones who came back for me. And I found myself, which I had not realized I had been losing until it was almost entirely gone. Evelyn used to say that boundaries are not walls. They are just honesty made visible. A line in the ground that says, here is where I stand, and here is what I will and will not accept. They hurt to draw. They cost something real. But without them, the only thing you are doing is slowly disappearing, while everyone around you pretends not to notice. I drew mine. And on the other side of them, I found a life that was smaller and quieter and more genuinely mine than anything I had built in 40 years of saying yes. If you have a family story like this one, I want to hear it. If you have been a Harold in your own life, if you have spent years pouring yourself out for people who took it for granted, if you have finally reached the point where you said enough, tell me in the comments. Share what happened. Share what you learned. Share where you are in the story right now. You are not alone, not even close. And subscribe, because this is a place for people who are learning to stand their ground, draw their lines, and reclaim the lives they were always supposed to be living. The ocean is very patient. The way it just keeps coming in, keeps pulling back, keeps doing what it does regardless of what is happening on the shore. I think that is what peace actually looks like, not the absence of difficulty, just the steady, reliable fact of your own presence, your own breath, your own choice to keep going. Marcus caught a seagull feather on the beach that evening and presented it to me with the gravity of someone handing over a significant prize. This is for you, Grandpa Harold, for your house. I took it carefully with both hands. Thank you, buddy. I am going to put this somewhere important. He nodded, satisfied, and ran back toward the water. I held the feather and looked out at the ocean, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt exactly like the person I was supposed to be. That is enough. That is everything.